Hi, I'm Alison Flood, culture editor at New Scientist, and I'm here to talk to Justin Cronin, author of The Ferryman, which is the first book we have chosen for our new book club. This science fiction novel is set on the island of Prospera, a utopia to all appearances. Citizens live a charmed life until they grow too old, whereupon they're sent to a neighbouring island known as the Nursery for a reboot. But when Proctor, the ferryman who takes them there, is given a cryptic message, the world is not the world, he begins to realise everything is not what it seems. Justin, hi and welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. How would you describe The Ferryman? I've got my copy here to a potential reader. What kind of a book do you see it as?
I would say that it is a thriller. It is a dystopian novel. It is a post-apocalyptic story. But at the end of the day, it's a very character-driven story about a friendship connection between family members at the end of the world. You know, the thing about The Ferryman that I think is most kind of distinctive of my work is that it is a book with a big twist. It's a book with a huge twist, a huge surprise about three-quarters of the way through the novel. And you and I were just talking about this, how it makes you know, you kind of have to dance around the book a little bit for when you talk about it, because you really don't want to spoil that.
For those of our viewers who have read it, towards the end of the interview, we're going to give you a spoiler warning, and then Justin and I will discuss the ending because I'm desperate to ask him about it. But you mentioned the Passage. I love the Passage trilogy, which was out, like a decade ago or so. It's also set in a post-apocalyptic world where a virus has turned people into vampire-like beings. But The Ferryman is so different from that, the setting, the world. Was there something in particular which sent you on this route to tell this story?
There were a lot of different sort of things that were eating at me, different ideas that were kind of like, you know, touching the corners of my brain. And it took a little while for me to kind of put them all together as a particular story. And so I guess I'd say two things. And one is the catastrophe of upward movement of capital to a very narrow bandwidth of society is something that makes me, I feel like it's the root of all of our problems, is the fact that a very narrow bandwidth of people, such as the people in Prospera, who live these wonderful, luxurious, fulfilling lives of creativity and so on, in a state of complete oblivion to everything else. And this has, worried me for a substantial period of time in our own world as perhaps the source of, great misery. It's not a story that ever ends well historically. If you look at those moments in history where the rich have gotten too rich, right? That story only ends one way. There's really no variation in it at all. And so that was sort of eating at me. And then a couple of other ideas kind of came into the periphery. I mean, one was the question of living a very long life and what that's going to mean for our social institutions. The people on Prospera are kind of effectively immortal. They live very long lives and then get a chance to kind of start it all over and have fresh new experiences. It's the ultimate luxury. But along the way, they live very long lives. They live between 130 and 150 years. I was born in 1962, so the actuarial tables tell me I'm going to tap out somewhere short of 80, right? My kids, born in the 90s and then in the early 2000s, they should live to be maybe 100. And it's commonly said that the first person to live to 150 years has already been born. I've been wondering for a while how we will accommodate such long lives in our society. Not everybody will get to do it. Again, it'll be the property of the people with the most resources. But pretty much all of our social institutions are organized around the idea that we're going to tap out somewhere around 70 years of age, our social welfare systems, and then institutions like our career, and then marriage. And in Prospera, because you would live to be 130 years old, everything is by contract. So romantic unions are called, they're social arrangements. They are by contract from a period of 5 to 15 years, creating a world where everything is new, everything is always interesting, and everything is also sort of temporary and has no consequences. There was like 10,000 things that were coming at me while I was writing the book, and those were just kind of two of them.
Given the major plot twist, which hits about three-quarters of the way through the novel, did you know where you were going from the start?
I did, and it was very, very difficult to pull off. When I wrote this book, what I wanted to write a book was a book with a big, like, holy hell moment in it, where you got a certain distance through the book, and all of a sudden something happens that basically makes you turn the camera around, look down the hallway of the book you just traveled, and realize everything was headed to some, particular destination, and you never saw it coming, and it rewrites, the book in your head instantly and makes you send it pinwheeling across the room. I'd seen it done in a number of instances, mostly short stories and movies. I hadn't really thought of it as a novelistic trick, and I wanted to pull it off for something the length of a novel. And It is really hard to do. I spent because you have to go back and keep restitching and re-embroidering so that everything lines up. And so the draft of the book that I handed to my editor was actually draft 17.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I will never do that again. That was way too much work.
So how much do you plan and plot things out? Did you have the whole shape of it there? You needed to have the whole shape there before you started writing because you needed to be writing to this end point.
Yeah, I had a good solid plan. It ended up being very hard to stick to. You don't really understand the logic of the story until you're actually building the story. You'll come across something and you'll think, oh my God, that's not going to work. Right. And then you have to keep rewiring and rewiring and rewiring. I tend to work from some kind of strong plan though, because a book, I always believe this, a book has to know its own ending. The very beginning of a novel needs to know and show the reader that it knows itself thoroughly. So I don't think you can write a good book without knowing the ending. I mean, I read a lot of books that I love, and then you come to the end, and the thing kind of falls apart in the last 5 minutes. And I think that's because the writer didn't know the end.
And then it was all a dream.
Right? Yeah. So they have to kind of just like find an exit door. The house is on fire, and you just got to get out. And I try to make sure that that I really know where something's going to land. And so like the very last scene of The Ferryman was a scene that I essentially had written almost in advance. Like I really knew how that was going to work. And so it gave me a place to get to.
Tell us about the character of Proctor, your ferryman, who's caught up in this crisis as he starts to realize his world might not be what he thought it was.
Proctor is a guy who's basically having like a midlife crisis in a highly unusual circumstance, right? Conceived of as a man who's very much part of a system, right? And it's given his life meaning. And as he says, it's the algorithm by which he's understood his life. I am performing a duty. The duty is useful. People think well of me. That's sort of his calculus, right? Which is a calculus that a lot of us make. You reach a certain point in life, you're like, well, I do this thing. It seems important. People like me. There's my life, right? And he's made this calculus, and yet something is bothering him tremendously, and he can't quite put his finger on it. And in fact, what it has to do superficially with is the fact that his life is so good, right? His life is actually kind of greased rails, and he's a smart guy. He's a warm and sympathetic guy, but he's also very much part of a highly impersonal machine. So these two things are kind of at war within him, as most of us are. Like you go, like our careers, our social status, these tend to, we allow them to define us, and who we are underneath is often somebody who's quite different. And that's the case for Proctor. And one of the things he has, and this is actually a matter of record in the book, because when you go to university in Proctor's world, you take a whole bunch of tests to find out what sort of career you'd be best at. And the number that's highest for him is emotional intelligence. He's very good at kind of reading other people's states of mind, which is what makes him a very good ferryman. Because as a ferryman, his job is to help people through, as he says, one of life's most emotionally challenging moments. Because to get on the ferry, you are going to get a new life, but you really have to give up the old one, right? You're not going to remember anything about it, not the people, your friends, your job, your home, all of the things that are sort of, as he says, ballast for the ship of life. You have to give it all up, and that's tough. And convincing people that change is the right thing, and you're going to get a new life, and think about that, and so on, and sort of easing them through to prevent, emotional meltdown, which, is part of the book as well. That's what he's very good at. So he's smart, he's kind, and he's at war with himself. Those are the three things I'd say about Proctor.
So Proctor wears this health tracker, like all of the inhabitants
Right.
of Prospera, which monitors his health and his well-being, and it starts to kind of decline if he's not experiencing life to its fullness. I found it a really chilling idea, this health tracker that's like embedded in their arms, right?
Well, aren't you wearing one right now? I mean, like, this is the kind of thing, like, it's sort of inevitable, right? So yeah, I mean, everybody in Prospera has a monitor that it gives them a percentage number to track their overall well-being, which is, the matrix of emotional, psychological, and physical health that constitutes your sense of the happiness and goodness of life, right? And everybody's got one. It's kind of like the world's ultimate Fitbit. And it keeps people off the ferry, essentially. Like, if you're living your life and you have a good job and a nice partner and good friends and the wines are good and whatever, the number will stay up. And once things get dull or you get old or things stop amusing you in the way that they used to because these people's lives are ultimately rather frivolous. The number starts to go down, and Proctor, as a younger man, he's only in his 40s, his number has started to go down really fast, and he's got to figure out why is what is bothering him, and that's sort of the engine of the novel.
How tech and AI like change us and how we live with them. It feels like a theme that you're exploring in the novel. Is that right? Is it a concern for you?
I'm becoming more and more analog by the day, actually. Like in many different ways, technology has begun to make me feel extremely anxious. And if you're not worried about AI, you're simply not paying attention.
Are you worried about AI then?
Tremendously. I mean, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to disrupt the economy enormously. AI may cure cancer. I mean, like AI may just one day go, "Oh, you guys wanted to cure cancer? Oh, here's how you do it," right? I mean, like the kind of infinite amount of intelligence that a system that starts engaging with the collective knowledge of the human species, right? Like what that can accomplish is kind of, it's hard to imagine. It may be impossible to imagine. It may be spectacular, but at the same time, so many of the things that occupy us, that constitute work, that gives us meaning in life, is going to be eradicated, and it's going to happen really, really fast. It's going to change an awful lot of things, and of course, I do worry about some of the existential dangers of machine intelligence, which a lot of people within that industry are starting to warn people about. We are essentially creating a new species.
There's a lot going on tech-wise in The Ferryman, right? But the heart of it is it's human characters who you bring to life so brilliantly, sometimes heartbreakingly. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I was weeping on quite a few occasions. How important was it to you to make the characters are so central to it? It's not about the technology.
The things that move writers and make them care are the characters in a book. That's always been true. The thing that is most interesting to me, even as I lie awake at night worrying about, say, AI, the things that are interesting to me and have meaning and value are other human beings. At a level of artistry, when you're making a novel, you're making what I call a temporary reality of fact and feeling. And the facts can be things like an island where everybody wears the world's fanciest Fitbit, right? The feeling comes from the people.
We touched on it earlier, but Prospera is an island of haves, the haves who are like the wealthy who have this life of ease and of happiness. But this is all thanks to the workers on a neighboring island who do all the nasty bits of life. And as we learn more about this world that you've created, the split between these haves and haves not becomes clearer and clearer. I don't want to give like loads away, but how much did the actions of today's billionaires, such as Elon Musk and his space race, influence your thinking?
A lot. One of the things that strikes me as the root of all problems, right, is this massive inequity of wealth. Money is power. Money is political capital. Money is everything. What happens, of course, is that when you live like that, you kind of reality gets bent for you, right? Like you think you know everything. You think you're that you think your opinions are the most important opinions in the room. You forget some basic human realities, and one is that, for instance, death comes for us all. Nobody here gets out alive. You can't take it with you. You can't even take you with you. So people who live in these tremendously curated environments where, like Jeff Bezos, you have to have a yacht to get to your yacht. These people are, living in a state of massive delusion. And also, of course, the dynamic is one, as they say in history, that's only ended one way. Eventually, somebody does the math. The have-nots look around and say, gosh, there are so many more of us than there are of them, right? Virtually all of our problems right now are solvable. You can solve climate change tomorrow. Like, we have the technology to do it. I mean, it's not perfect, but we could do it. And yet we do not. Our politics are completely sclerotic because of this. And so the island of Prospera, if somebody's drinking the wine, somebody has to pour the wine, somebody has to smash the grapes, right? So there is this labor force that is, there's about it's a ratio about 7-1, and they're figuring it out, right? They're figuring it out. They lived inside a system for a very long time. It's told them who they are and what they are. People tend to believe that for a while, but then one day they snap out of it.
Now, I'm going to say now to people who are watching, only keep watching if you finish the novel, because we're going to have a chat now about the plot twist that that Justin hits it with.
We're going to open the kimono of the ferryman, which I've been unable to do ever, because every audience I've ever been with, there's been a lot of people who are like, just don't tell me. And like, I can't do it. So now,
Warning, warning, warning. Don't keep listening.
go away, people who have not read the book, go away.
So tell us about that plot twist and that ending. It just blew me away.
I really wanted to write a book about interstellar travel. And one of the reasons I want to do that is I grew up with science fiction that had a wonderful, grand sense of the sublime. By that, I mean things like 2001, right, which was very important to me. And then in 1977, it all changed. And it changed because of Star Wars, essentially. Like interstellar travel became sort of something that was just kind of jolly fun, and it seemed to have only two dimensions, like ships at sea. And to some extent, Star Trek had done that in the 60s, which I loved Star Trek growing up, the original. But everything I write is in some ways in conversation with the things that I grew up loving, right? And one thing I'd seen was that the mysteries of time and space and the infinite had been sort of put aside in these kinds of narratives. And I wanted to return to that. I was taking a walk at night, and I realized, looking up above, that what I was seeing was pretty much all time and space in a moment. It's there every night to look at if you want to see it, right? And it's just like, it was a completely humbling, awe-inspiring, and terrifying experience of the sublime that I had. But that was very, very sort of, like, that was very much the sort of lighter fluid of that aspect, of one aspect of the book. And I wanted to write a book that contained that sensibility. Right. And the other one, of course, the big twist, the sort of this thing called consciousness integration. And I assume that's pretty much like the meat of your question, right? Where there's the designer who's constructed a dream space with their unconscious mind, et cetera, et cetera. What I'll go back to and simply say is, I have the craziest damn dream life of anybody you have ever met. My waking life and my dream life are in competition with each other. It's not even so much that like one is the subordinate reality to the other. I don't know. I think it's a race to the finish line for these two things. And so I've always been kind of obsessed by the imaginary reality. And I guess I want to call it an imagined reality, because dreaming is, your unconscious mind is a genius. I believe that all writers and all artists are people who are simply good at getting in touch with the unconscious mind. That's where creativity. So this has been a subject of sort of long-standing interest for me. And so all of this stuff was kind of flowing into the big twist.
The consciousness integration, this idea that people need to dream and to have interesting dreams to keep their minds sort of going haywire over the 200 odd years that they have to travel through space. What research did you do into long duration sleep and what it might do to the mind?
Oh, none whatsoever.
Oh, none whatsoever. Great. It just feels like it is true, though, that your mind couldn't just sort of potter around without any help for hundreds of years.
Well, we need to dream. I mean, I did the research insofar as like what dreams actually are. Like, I know what they are for me. And I know if you don't dream and dream healthily, right, you will lose your marbles, right? It's like, it's an important sort of sorting and filing tool for the mind to process experience, including traumatic experiences.
So listen, I got to the end and I just wanted more. I wanted to know more about what was going to happen to the settlers, and I wanted to know more about Proctor and what would happen to him and what he might find. Is there any chance that you might continue this story, or is that it for this?
I don't think so. I mean, like my publishers were real clear on me. They wanted a standalone after the trilogy, right? I think in this case, I will probably let it lie. I'll probably let it lie.
No, I'm disappointed.
Writing a novel is like raising kids. You're supposed to just get them to the place where they will leave you, right? and you sort of stand on the pier and watch the book sail away and watch the characters sail away. And the impulse, of course, as it would be watching your own kids, say, drive off to university, and be like, no, come back, be children again. And you can't do that. You're not supposed to. That's bad.
Well, we'll just have to leave them where they are then, trying to make their life on this icy planet.
Well, they'll figure it out. And it'll take them 100 years or 1,000 years. They're gonna face a lot of the same problems we did. There's nothing, the book does not make the case that just because we start over, it doesn't mean that we're going to have a good outcome. You gotta learn from your mistakes.
I love the idea of Proctor and the spaceship kind of going down becoming legend in time, becoming some kind of religion for them. That was really lovely.
That is a personal obsession of mine, is the way in which the moment you and I are experiencing and living in now is somebody's very deep past,
Hmm.
right? My kids are in their 20s, and like my mother's actually still alive. My parents were born in the 30s, right? And their world, the world of the 1930s, is unimaginably quaint to me. I mean, the men wore hats, everybody smoked. It's impossible for me to really imagine their world as anything other than kind of a film strip. That I realized, even as the 60s and 70s are tremendously vivid to me, right? And I was in them, and it was real, and it was the same world you and I are living in. It's now, to my children, an impossibly quaint past, and for their kids it will be like the Roman Empire, right? Right, and you just add a few generations on top of that, and all of a sudden you're mythology. You're not a person,
Yeah, yeah.
you're a myth.
A deep thought. Excellent. Well, Justin, thank you so much for coming to chat to us all. It's been really interesting. I'm sorry to hear there'll be no Ferryman 2, but I shall go back and read it again to comfort myself.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for coming to chat.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.